In this episode, we move from privacy as an abstract idea into the real places where data actually enters an organization, because privacy management becomes practical the moment you can point to where collection happens. A privacy program cannot stay accurate if it only talks in generalities like we collect information when you use our services, because that hides the important details that create risk and confusion. Collection points are the doors and windows where personal data comes in, and they show up in far more places than most beginners expect. Some are obvious, like sign-up forms, but others are subtle, like customer support chats, device logs, or partner referrals that arrive behind the scenes. By the end of this lesson, you should be able to recognize collection points, explain why each one exists, tie it to a clear purpose and legal basis, and describe what good data quality looks like for that specific use. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyberauthor.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. A collection point is any moment, channel, or mechanism where personal data is obtained, observed, inferred, or received, and that definition is broader than simply asking someone to type something into a form. When a person enters a name and email into a registration screen, that is direct collection, but when a service records an IP address from a network connection, that is still collection even though nobody typed it. When an organization buys a list, receives a referral from a partner, or imports a spreadsheet from a prior system, that is collection too, because the organization is acquiring personal data and taking responsibility for it. Even observation can be collection, like noting how someone navigates a site or how often they use a feature, because behavior data can still be personal data when it connects to a person or device. A privacy manager operationalizes this by making the organization stop thinking only about forms and start thinking about every path that data can travel into the environment. To identify collection points reliably, you need a method that does not depend on memory or a single team's perspective, because different groups see different doors. Product and marketing teams usually know about sign-up pages, newsletters, and promotional campaigns, but they may not think about technical logs that record identifiers. Customer support teams know about tickets, calls, and chat transcripts where people volunteer details that were never requested in a form. Human resources may collect data through recruiting portals, benefits enrollment, and workplace systems, while finance collects billing details, invoices, and payment confirmations. Security teams observe events to detect threats, and those events can include user identifiers, device fingerprints, or location hints. The practical skill here is learning to ask, where does information about a person enter, and then validating the answer by checking real workflows and systems, not just policy statements. Once you can list collection points, the next step is to capture purpose, which means stating why the organization needs the data in a way that is specific enough to be meaningful. Purpose is not a slogan like improving the user experience, because that phrase can cover almost anything and often hides conflicting goals. A better purpose statement explains the function that depends on the data, like creating an account, delivering a purchased service, preventing fraudulent access, responding to a support request, or meeting a legal record-keeping obligation. The same type of data can have different purposes depending on context, which is why purpose has to be tied to the collection point rather than to the data element alone. For example, an email address collected for account recovery is not the same as an email address collected for marketing, even if the characters look identical. Operationally, clear purpose statements reduce accidental reuse, because teams can see whether a new planned use matches the original reason for collection. Beginners often assume that if a purpose seems helpful to the business, that automatically justifies collecting the data, but privacy management requires a second concept called legal basis. Legal basis is the justification recognized by law for processing personal data, and it matters because it controls what you are allowed to do and what expectations you must meet. Different laws use different structures, but the general idea stays consistent. You need a lawful reason to collect and use the data, not just a desire to do so. Under the General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR, for example, legal bases can include consent, contract necessity, legal obligation, vital interests, public task, and legitimate interests, each with its own expectations. Under the California Consumer Privacy Act, CCPA, the approach is framed differently, focusing on disclosures, rights, and limits on certain sharing, but you still need to be clear about why you collect and how you use. A privacy program manager does not memorize a list for its own sake, but uses the idea of legal basis to prevent vague justifications and to keep processing aligned to what the organization can defend. Capturing legal basis becomes practical when you connect it to the collection point and the purpose in a consistent record, because that record becomes the reference for future decisions. Consider a simple scenario where a person enters payment details to purchase a subscription, and the purpose is to complete the transaction and provide access. In many frameworks, the legal basis here would be contract necessity, because without the data you cannot provide what the person is asking for. Now consider a different scenario where the person is shown a checkbox to receive promotional emails, and the purpose is marketing. That often relies on consent, because marketing is not required to deliver the purchase service and people should have a clear choice. If you mix these up, you create confusion and risk, such as treating marketing as if it were required for service delivery, or treating required service messages as if they were optional marketing. The goal is not to turn every collection moment into a legal lecture, but to make sure the organization can explain, in plain language, why each collection point exists and why it is justified. Another important part of operational capture is distinguishing between data the organization truly needs and data that is merely nice to have, because that difference shapes both purpose and legal basis decisions. Necessary data is data without which the service cannot function as described, like a shipping address for delivering a physical product or credentials for accessing an account. Nice-to-have data is data that might improve analytics or personalization but is not required to deliver the core offering, like optional demographic details or extra profile fields. Privacy programs encourage minimizing collection, not as a moral statement, but as a risk control and a quality control, because collecting extra data increases the chance of inaccuracies, user mistrust, and security exposure. When you document collection points, you should capture whether each data element is required or optional, and what happens if it is not provided. That simple discipline forces teams to justify their choices and prevents accidental collection creep, where fields get added because it seemed convenient at the time. Data quality needs are the third piece of this episode's title, and they are easy to overlook because people assume quality is an IT problem. In privacy management, data quality matters because inaccurate, outdated, or mismatched data can harm people and can also create compliance failures when rights requests or notices depend on correct records. Data quality needs should be described in relation to purpose, because the level of accuracy required depends on how the data will be used. If you use an address to ship a package, accuracy is critical right now, and validation may be necessary to reduce delivery errors. If you store a support conversation for training staff, the main quality concern might be context and correct association with the ticket, not perfect spelling. If you use data for reporting trends, you may care more about consistency and completeness at scale than about one record being flawless. Operationalizing data quality means defining what good looks like for each collection point, then building simple controls to support it, such as validation rules, review steps, or clear instructions to the person providing the data. A common misconception is that more data automatically improves decisions, but low-quality data often produces confident mistakes, which is worse than having less data. Imagine a system that collects date of birth to verify age, but the field allows impossible entries and nobody checks them, leading to a database filled with nonsense. The organization might then use that data to make decisions about eligibility, which can create unfair outcomes and high frustration. Similarly, if a company collects a phone number for account recovery but does not confirm it belongs to the user, the system may send sensitive recovery codes to the wrong person. These are not just technical bugs. They are privacy failures because they involve personal data being used in ways that affect individuals. Data quality requirements help prevent these outcomes by forcing teams to think about accuracy, timeliness, and integrity at the moment of collection, rather than discovering problems after they have already caused harm. To capture purpose, legal basis, and data quality needs consistently, privacy programs typically use a standardized record, even if the organization does not call it by a formal name. The record ties together the collection point, the categories of personal data collected there, the purpose or purposes, the legal basis, retention expectations, and quality requirements. You can think of it as a structured description of one slice of reality, like sign-up, billing, customer support, or device monitoring, rather than one giant document that tries to describe everything at once. The value of standardization is that different teams can contribute without inventing new formats each time, and reviewers can spot gaps quickly. If one record includes a clear purpose but another uses vague phrasing, the inconsistency becomes visible. If legal basis is missing, it is obvious. If quality requirements are not described, it becomes a question rather than an assumption. You also need to pay attention to collection points that involve third parties, because those often hide complexity that breaks transparency and accountability. For example, an organization might embed a payment service provider or an analytics service, and data might flow to that provider as part of normal operation. From the user's perspective, that data collection still feels like it is happening inside the organization's product, because it is part of the experience, even if another company processes it. Operational capture should document what data is sent, for what purpose, and under what relationship, such as whether the provider is acting as a processor or as a separate controller depending on the context. This is also where data quality can be tricky, because errors might be introduced or amplified when data crosses boundaries, such as mismatched identifiers between systems. Good privacy operations treat third-party collection points as first-class collection points, not as an afterthought, because they directly affect notices, contracts, and user expectations. It is worth spending time on the idea that collection points often change faster than policies, which is why this work must be connected to change processes. New features create new forms, new data fields, and new telemetry, sometimes introduced by small development decisions that do not feel privacy-related to the people making them. Marketing campaigns create new landing pages and tracking links that collect identifiers and behavior data. Customer support teams adopt new tools that record conversations and attach metadata to tickets. Even internal operations change, such as switching recruitment platforms or adopting a new identity system. If your documentation of collection points is a one-time project, it will be out of date quickly, and your notice and transparency work will drift away from reality. The Privacy Program Manager's operational task is to ensure there is a trigger to update records when collection changes, so purpose, legal basis, and quality requirements remain accurate over time. When you evaluate whether a purpose and legal basis match a collection point, it helps to use a simple reasoning habit. Ask what would break if you did not collect this data at this moment, and whether that break is truly tied to the service the person expects. If the service cannot work without the data, the purpose is likely core and defensible. If the service can still work but would be less optimized, the purpose may be secondary and should be treated with more care, especially if it involves profiling, targeted marketing, or broad sharing. Then ask whether the user would be surprised by the collection at that moment, because surprise is often a sign that transparency is weak or that the purpose is not obvious. Surprise does not automatically mean the collection is wrong, because security monitoring can be surprising but necessary, yet it does mean you need clear explanations and disciplined limits. This habit keeps your documentation grounded in real expectations rather than abstract categories. Data quality requirements also connect to data subject rights operations, even if you have not built those processes yet, because rights requests depend on correct records and correct identity linkage. If a person asks for access to their data, the organization must be able to locate records that relate to them, which requires that identifiers are captured and stored consistently. If a person asks for correction, the organization must know which systems hold the data and what the authoritative source is, otherwise corrections become inconsistent and confusing. If a person asks for deletion where applicable, the organization needs to know whether the data is duplicated, whether it is required for legal reasons, and whether it is linked to logs or backups. These operations become much easier when collection points are documented with purpose, legal basis, and quality needs, because those records reveal what data exists, why it exists, and what should happen to it. In other words, careful collection capture is not busy work. It is foundational infrastructure for the rest of the privacy program. As a final way to bring the lesson together, remember that privacy management is not just about saying the right things, but about being able to prove that your practices are intentional and controlled. Identifying collection points forces you to confront reality, not assumptions, because it maps the actual moments where personal data enters the organization. Capturing purpose ensures that each collection activity is connected to a legitimate reason rather than vague ambition or habit. Capturing legal basis ensures that the justification aligns with what the law expects and what you can defend under scrutiny, even when different jurisdictions frame that justification differently. Capturing data quality needs ensures that the data you collect is fit for its purpose and does not create harm through errors, mismatches, or outdated records. When these three pieces are consistently recorded and maintained, transparency becomes easier, operations become calmer, and the privacy program gains the credibility it needs to guide real decisions.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.